Welcome back to the Foundry by Forge College. I'm absolutely thrilled to have you here today. So, in our previous explainer, we spent some serious time at the workbench, right? We were building analysis artifacts, mapping out those complex transaction flows, and sketching out initial recommendations. But a sketch is really just a sketch until it's thoroughly tested. Today, we're taking those rough Sealevel execution drafts and forging them into a certified, highly defensible report. Our focus, integrating findings and validations for execution integrations. Okay, let's dive into this and see exactly how we turn raw data into absolute, ironclad conclusions. Here's our engineering schematic for the day. First, turning drafts to conclusions. Second, the evidence validation pass. Then, resolving findings and contradictions, because things always get messy. Fourth, updating artifacts and traceability. And finally, we'll hit the verification checkpoint. Let's get straight to work. Now you might be asking, why validate right now? Haven't we done enough heavy lifting already? Well, in the engineering and Web3 space, an unvalidated piece of data is basically just a rumor, and you absolutely cannot build a load-bearing bridge on a rumor, right? We're dealing with Solana's Sealevel execution environment here. We need ironclad facts to build a certified final report that your stakeholders can actually trust and, more importantly, act upon. All right, moving into section 1, turning drafts into conclusions, going from rough sketches to certified schematics. Think of these inputs as a massive pile of disparate parts just sitting on our workbench right now. We've got our scope document to keep us totally focused, our evidence catalog packed with raw items, those beautiful artifact templates we drew up, and our initial recommendations. Now, they're great on their own, but right now, they're just loosely connected. Our job today is to rigorously test these components and literally weave them together into a coherent, peer-review-ready draft. So the crucial point here is understanding exactly what we're focusing our blueprint on today. When we talk about execution integrations, we aren't just talking about isolated chunks of code. No, we're examining the highly specific interactions between transaction flows, program calls, and runtime behaviors within Sealevel. This complex web is exactly what we have to map, test, and validate to produce truly actionable insights. Let's hit section 2, the evidence validation pass, or, as I like to think of it, putting our witnesses on the stand to see if their stories actually hold up. Okay, so your validation index is essentially your engineering logbook. Notice how every single piece of evidence here gets assigned a canonical status: validated, partial, or unvalidated. There is no wishy-washy gray area of, well, I think it's right. Nope. You take the checklist you built earlier, run the test, like say a timestamp and transaction hash crosscheck, and you boldly record the outcome. It's methodical, it's completely objective, and it brings absolute clarity to your evidence catalog. 95. This right here is your magic number. For your draft to even be considered acceptable for sign-off, 95% or more of your evidence items must either be fully validated or labeled partial with a crystal clear mitigation plan. If you hit that 95% threshold, boom, you are officially cleared to proceed to peer review. But if you've got a high-impact item just sitting there in the unvalidated pile, you literally stop the assembly line and escalate. Moving on to section 3, resolving contradictions. This is what happens when machines argue. Ever felt like two transaction logs were just standing by the water cooler, gossiping and completely contradicting each other? Yeah, it happens all the time. When our data machines argue, it usually falls into one of two camps. Over on the left, we've got parsing or scope errors. This is just a misunderstanding. Maybe your collection timings were slightly off or your normalization pipeline had a bug. The fix? You just fix the pipeline. But on the right, we have genuine behavior contradictions. This is when the conflicting on-chain behaviors are both completely valid. You can't just ignore one to make your report look cleaner. You have to sit the data down, kind of like a tired parent mediating a fight, keep both findings, and document exactly what they are telling you. Now, what's really interesting about this slide is how it formalizes the debugging process for these conflicts. You don't just guess. Step 1, you rerun the original trace. Step 2, compare the data scope and timestamps. Step 3, check your parsing and normalization code for any silly mistakes. And finally, step 4, you confidently classify the cause. It is a highly repeatable reconciliation pattern that takes all the emotion and guesswork right out of the equation. And here is the golden rule of conflict resolution. If a genuine contradiction remains unresolved, it goes straight into your conflict register with an explicit rationale and a documented risk level. We never, and I mean absolutely never, sweep a contradiction under the rug with vague phrasing. We shine a spotlight on it and clearly state the impact. All right, section 4, updating artifacts and traceability.
Let's talk about the red string.
And this brilliantly illustrates the traceability chain concept. Think of it like a detective's case board. We never, ever make a recommendation in a vacuum. A validated recommendation anchors directly back to a specific evidence ID. And that evidence ID, it anchors directly back to an original scope question posed by your stakeholders. It's the straight, unbreakable line of logic from the question asked to the data gathered, right down to the advice given. So, we update our blueprint. We edit our diagrams to reflect only the validated and reconciled traces. We clearly annotate absolutely any element that relies on partial evidence. We point all our artifact data sources to those validated evidence IDs, and we make sure to insert inline citations right there in our prose. The core engineering rule here is simple: no floating elements. As you tackle more advanced topics with us at Forge College, you'll quickly realize that this strict traceability is exactly what separates a student's guess from a professional's certified analysis. Everything has to be version tagged and anchored to a cold, hard fact.
Section 5, the verification checkpoint. This is our internal engineering quality gate.
I want you to treat this submission process as your ultimate pre-flight checklist. Do not even think about calling it done until every single piece of evidence has a validation status and a source. Ensure your conflict register actually exists with those resolutions and rationales attached. Check that your integration diagrams have proper version tags. You don't want reviewers looking at old drafts. Make sure your recommendations have that red string traceability we just talked about, and that your validation log is bundled up. Simply put, your visuals and your prose must use the exact same terminology and facts. Let's move to and see how this builds our objective process. You sit at your desk and you run these 5 checks locally before you even think about asking for sign-off. 1. Check the evidence coverage. 2. Do a spot check on the traceability of a few random recommendations. 3. Audit that conflict resolution register. 4. Ensure your diagrams perfectly match the text. And 5. Confirm all your packaging, links, and citations actually point to the right appendix. If you can survive this gauntlet, you're ready for peer review. Look, if you take absolutely nothing else away from today's explainer, write this quote down. Treat validation as an auditable process. Handle contradictions with a documented pattern, and maintain tight traceability. Seriously, if you adhere to these 3 practical principles, you completely remove the friction from the review process. Doing all this heavy lifting right now makes finalizing your final report an absolute breeze. So, I'm going to leave you with this provocative question. Is your draft really ready to survive peer review? Take a hard look at your evidence catalog right now and ask yourself if your witnesses can actually stand the heat of the stand. I challenge you to put these rigorous systems in place today. Thank you so much for joining me for this explainer. If you are hungry to keep building your Web3 knowledge and want to explore more deep dives on Sealevel, Solana, and beyond, be sure to visit forge.college. I'll see you in the next one.